Commander-in-Chief is a two-player abstract game. It is basically a chess variant. The units represent military units of the modern time. They move on a board divided in squares, and each unit has a very strict way in which it can move, but they do move in different ways from one another, and they also have other ways in which they can interact. But again, pretty much this is a chess variant. In fact, the board can also double as a board for chess or checkers. But let's see how the game works. I don't usually make videos about boxes and the way boxes are organized, but the presentation for this game is really impressive, so I wanted to show it to you. Well, you have a nice illustration on the cover, little windows to show some of the miniatures. Then in the box you will find a plastic cover that allows you to organize the stands for the miniatures in this game. There's also a slot for the timer. And then you have this very nice organizer with miniatures that you will use in the game, and you can remove it, and under that you find enough room to store the board and the rule book. And oh wow, look at these miniatures. I find them really impressive, really nice looking. They are not over detailed, but even in their abstraction, even their abstract quality has a certain elegance to it. They have a very nice tactile feel, they're sturdy miniatures, they're really just nice and pleasant to play with, and I find that these miniatures definitely add to the charm of the game. This is the board for Commander-in-Chief, and here I have set up the game. It is ready to start. The other side of the board has a traditional chessboard printed on it, so you can also use these pieces to play checkers or chess, but let's talk about Commander-in-Chief. In Commander-in-Chief, like in chess, players alternate moving a piece at a time. Pieces move in different ways depending on the type of piece involved. When a piece enters the space containing the piece of an opponent, the piece of the opponent is eliminated, and players simply alternate moving pieces, eliminating each other's pieces until one of the two players manages to eliminate the commander-in-chief of the opponent. The first player to do so is the winner. Let's see how the units move. Each player has a destroyer that can only move by sea, and it moves one square per move, but it can move then in any direction. That is, it can move in any adjacent water square. Each player has two submarines. The first move for a submarine must be to enter water. Then a submarine can move two squares diagonally or laterally, but a submarine can never move straight ahead, never directly forward, or never directly backwards like that, but it can move diagonally backwards if need be. Also, a submarine can move through units because it is effectively moving under that unit. Then you have amphibians, which are sort of the pawns of this game. Amphibians can move by land or by water, but when they're in the water they can only move forward, diagonally forward, or straight forward. That is, they can only move in one of the three squares in front of them. They cannot go back, they have to keep going, but if they manage to keep going for long enough and they reach the land area of the opponent, then they become king amphibians, and at that point they can move one or two squares in any direction, and that makes them particularly powerful. But of course they have to make it alive to the other side of the strait before they can do that. Air units move over land or water. You have helicopters that move exactly two squares. You cannot choose to move them by less, and they can move in a straight line, or they can move in any combination of directions, and also they can move through other units. Then you have two fighters and a bomber. These airplanes move in the same way. That is, they can move up to two squares diagonally in any of the four diagonal directions, but up to three squares in any of the four orthogonal directions. So they can travel pretty far when they are traveling that way. The bomber and the fighters move in the same way following these rules. The only difference between them is that bombers can move through other units and fighters cannot. Then you have tanks that only move in the land area of the owning player, and they can move up to two squares in any one of the four diagonal directions. And finally, your commander. The commander moves one square per move, but can move in any direction, can also enter water, squares, and if it reaches the land of the opponent, then it becomes stronger and it can move up to 2 squares in any direction. Of course, that also means that you're exposing your commander to great danger because you send the commander to the enemy land, so you may want to consider carefully before you embark on something like that. And if all this seems complicated and hard to remember, don't worry. Players receive a player aid with the summary of the rules, but that is really not the main thing because the rules are so simple. But much more important, the player aid has visual reminders of how each unit can move and also summary of what the units can do, since some units have special abilities. For example, some units can move through other units, and some of the units, such as the tank or the bomber, can prevent other units from moving through them. The game also comes with several extra stands that can be used to increase the complexity of the game and or to create balance. You can assign extra stands to the players will agree on the number that can be used, and they do not have to use the same number. A player may have 0 and a player may have several. Then players assign the extra stands to their units freely, and again they do not have to assign them to the same units, so you may have a side with submarines that have extra stands, another side with tanks and helicopters with extra stands. Units with an extra stand are stronger. They can suffer 2 hits before they are eliminated. The first time when you have a unit in position to eliminate a unit with an extra stand, you simply declare the intention, I'm going to use my move to attack that submarine. You do not move the pieces on the board, you simply remove the extra stand, and now the piece is a normal piece, and later it can be eliminated normally by an enemy unit that enters its same space. And having the extra stands is certainly a good thing. From game to game, you can experiment different things, you can try to reinforce different parts of your army. Also, this to me seems to be the perfect parent-kid game. So I think it is good to have the option of creating balance between players of different age or different levels of experience by assigning a different number of stands to the players. The game is very light. It may sound complicated just because of the list of different moves and capabilities that you have to memorize, but it is really not hard to learn or to play. It moves quickly if you use the timer. That is really important because otherwise there is the possibility of having analysis paralysis here. You know what are the people in your group that you should not be playing a game like this with, so you have been warned. But overall, after all, the game is really not too long or too complicated. Actually, I would say, yeah, it is light on the rules, but it does have strategy. And that was not apparent to me at first. The first couple of games, it seemed to me that the game was really random. At the beginning, units are just clashing against units of the opponents. The board is really crowded, and there is a continuous exchange of units. I destroy this unit of yours, and that leads my unit now to be destroyed, and in return I attack this, and you attack that. And it seemed to me almost random, and at the end I wasn't sure what were going to be my units that would survive and would try to launch the final attack against the commander of the opponent when finally there is enough room around the board to maneuver. But then when you start learning what the units can do and how they can interact with one another, then you realize that actually the first part of the game does have strategy. That is really when you're trying to thin out the army of the opponent and you're trying to protect your units. Maybe not all of them, some will have to be sacrificed, but you're trying to protect a certain combination of units that later will allow you to launch the final attack. So yes, different phases of the game do feel different from one another, but I don't feel that they are randomly connected. There definitely is a progression and there is a build-up that you can pursue throughout the game. So to me, this at the end did feel like a game of strategy that does reward strategy and good planning and good reacting to what the other player is doing. I like the fact that 2 adults can play it as a filler, or you could play it with a kid. I like the fact that you can customize the level of difficulty, you can make it harder or easier from one side or the other. So there are a lot of good things about this game. The components are just fantastic. I think you could just buy the game for the toys and probably would be money well spent, the toys and the board, and then actually there's even a game that you can play with those. So in conclusion, this is a very enjoyable, very light abstract game with absolutely outstanding components. Overall, this is a good game and definitely a good product.